Hello, and welcome to the Soul Shaking Love podcast. I'm your host, Valerie Green from CoachValerieGreen.com. And this is a podcast about really helping you to have that mind, body, spirit connection, both with yourself and your true love. And for that reason, I'm so excited for our guest today, Bridgit Gaspard. Is that how you pronounce your last name? Because I trained with you, but I never said your last name.
Yes, Bridgit Dengel Gaspard.
Yes, and we trained together in 2013 and in her voice dialogue modality. And I'll tell you a little bit more about her before we jump in. Bridgit is the author of The Final Eighth, Enlist Your Inner Selves to Accomplish Your Goals, and the founder of the New York Voice Dialogue Institute. And we'll explain more about what voice dialogue is in a bit. And Bridgit is a former performer she earned a master's degree from Columbia University, and she teaches in numerous professional settings, including the Omega Institute in upstate New York, which is amazing. And she lives in New York City, where she maintains a thriving private practice, and she helps people resolve that inner and outer conflict, which we'll be talking about, and love all parts of themselves so they can thrive in every area of their life. And I'm so excited to talk to her today because we're going to be talking about how to resolve inner conflict about your relationship, because a lot of times we talk about how to resolve outer conflict, right? But we don't realize that when there's an outer conflict, there's also an inner conflict, and that when that's resolved first, then we can show up in a really collaborative way and an open-hearted way to resolve the outer conflict. But if we don't, if we're all inner conflict and we're torn, then that's going to really cause us to not be able to be fully present and resolve things with our partner, or even know if we're with the right partner, right, Bridgit?
Absolutely. Also, with inner conflict, sometimes your discomfort you think is the fault of your partner or the person you're dating.
Oh, I love that you said that.
So there's a lot of reasons to dig into what's going on with conflict, because it's not an easy process. I mean, it's not comfortable often, but I like to say that the discomfort that this conflict, inner and outer, brings wakes you. So it says, okay, something's going on and I can't stand it anymore. And I, as a coach and a therapist, I'm like, well, I'm sorry you're suffering, but I'm glad you can't stand it anymore.
Right.
Now you'll really dig in and figure out what's going on.
Right, exactly. I mean, tons of compassion, because there's so much suffering going on in the world right now. And open-heartedness. But I completely agree, it's like people don't change until the pain gets too bad, and it's about us really tuning into our inner pain. And there's a message underneath, about some change that needs to happen. And but yeah, and I know we're on the same page about that. And so first of all, let's just talk about, what does it really mean to be in inner conflict? Who's in conflict with whom, right?
Exactly. So we talked a little bit about voice dialogue, which is where I originally met you. And voice dialogue is this revolutionary technique developed by my mentors, the doctors Hal and Sidra Stone. And the premise, and I think this is a very important part, is that our healthy personality consists of many different parts, or alter egos, subpersonalities, inner selves. We call them, those words refer to the same, that they each have wisdom. And the thing is, they also have different agendas. So but it's not crazy. It's not dysfunction. It's just that, for example, when the alarm clock wakes you up in a deep sleep at 5:30 in the morning, the natural inclination is feeling our different parts saying, okay, let's get up. That's our responsible part, to throw that stupid noisy thing away. I want to go back to sleep. The angry self, maybe the lazy bones self. And so what I love about voice dialogue is that it takes that natural way that we humans are and does not pathologize it, but we go to different parts to find out their wisdom and their concerns, because every single part within us has the noble purpose of protection. Period. To protect our vulnerability. And there's nothing like love relationships that really heighten vulnerability.
Exactly. Although I think that there's the vulnerable inner child who isn't protecting the vulnerable inner child, but they just are. Right. So
exactly.
Each
but that vulnerable inner child might jump into a relationship, and that's wonderful, because without that vulnerable inner child, there isn't real intimacy. But
Mhm.
like me in center, having my vulnerable inner child, I have to have other parts that are more parent parts
Right.
that can keep that self protected and safe. And that could be vulnerable with the right people. But
Yeah.
if you've got parts that say safety is never be vulnerable, well, then you have an inner conflict right there about whether or not to become intimate. And you could be sexual and not be intimate at all. So when we say intimacy, it could be including sexuality, but it doesn't even have to. It's that sometimes that soul connection is much,
Exactly.
much more intimate than for many people than physical things that people do sexually and sensually.
Yes, exactly. I love that you said that. Yeah, intimacy. You're right. Intimacy is intimacy, and that the divine union that we feel with people. And if we do have parts that think that's not safe, then we don't let that happen, and then we miss the opportunity of that closeness. And that is something that voice dialogue can address, right? And yeah, I love all parts work modalities. I've studied many of them, and I love voice dialogue because it really does, it makes it light. I find I love all parts work modalities, and I integrate them together in my practice. And a lot of the ones that are about going inward and being mindful, those are really deeply fulfilling, and they're a little bit more serious. And I
Yeah.
feel like voice dialogue can be a lot more playful because it's almost like acting. You move to a different chair and you act the part, and then the facilitator asks questions to the part, right? And then you get to really embody it and learn what is the positive intention, right? What is it trying to protect? And that helps you, because if you're judging your inner critic, then you'll never learn the message and you'll never heal it and integrate it, right? So I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Exactly. I actually stumbled upon voice dialogue as a creativity tool. So you are so right. So when I was a performer, I moved into comedy, I did stand up and sketch, and I did improv, and I love improv. So there is this yes and quality that is similar to voice dialogue. But I
Yes.
want to be very clear, you move over, like you start in center and you move over to one side and come back, because you always want to come back, but it's not acting like faking.
Right.
It's very embodied, and that's the other thing I love about voice dialogue. And so for your listeners, I always say, even our conversations, start to notice our body language, because all of ourselves are embodied. They're physiological. How do I know I have an anxious self right now? Check in. Probably maybe your stomach's kind of going like this, or your breathing's a little bit shallow. And one of the things that I think voice dialogue does, and maybe why it's similar to performing arts, is it hooks you into your body. It wants us to find, how do I know what I know? There are some amazing questions and things like, what's your function? What do you care about? And so a part that's afraid of intimacy, you don't say like, get over this fear of intimacy. You go to that part, and it might be a very scared inner child, because we have many different inner children, who actually was really hurt, like holds your history, like maybe there really was some very painful heartache. And you don't tell that part to get over it. You listen and you're like, oh, wow. Well, what do you need? What does that part need in order to feel safe as we re-enter the dating world and things like that? And so the idea is that these parts can't run your life. Like, I was hurt once, so I'll never risk it again. That's
Exactly.
too small a life. But their lessons shouldn't be ignored, because then, as I've heard you say on different podcasts, you're just going to end up in the same relationship with a different name. So
Mhm.
that's the other real gift of going to these parts, especially when you don't want to hear what they have to say because they're
Yeah.
right.
Right. Which is why it's helpful to have someone facilitate the process, because
Absolutely.
then the facilitator can help to process that message so that you get the wisdom inside of it, so that you're left with something positive and productive, rather than like what? I have a 4-year-old to parent. I didn't want to parent a 4-year-old. She's screaming at me. What do I do?
Exactly, exactly. And that's actually one of the reasons I wrote the book, for those that couldn't get facilitated. It really is a guide. Here's what you do, here are some questions, and then here's how you process it. Because you're right, it doesn't help if you just feel stranded. Okay, I just spoke to my angry 4-year-old, and I'm myself just feeling distressed like my angry 4-year-old. It's about moving through that and learning from it so that you have access to it. But if your angry 4-year-old is sort of acting up when you're on a date, you want to at least touch base with like what's going on. Like maybe that 4-year-old is actually picking up that this person you're sitting across from has got something off about them. And
Right.
4-year-olds often are really good at energetically picking up something that's off, that your intellectual, sophisticated selves are like, oh, I can handle anything. Okay, no problem. I'm sophisticated. It's all good.
Right. And then we
Those
brush through
selves,
those red flags.
yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Right. I love what you said. I definitely want to talk about your book. I just want to highlight something really important that you just said, which is that the vulnerable inner child, like she has something, she needs to be safe. She needs to feel safe. And what is it that she needs to feel safe? And we might not like hearing it. And I do think that that's why it's so important to come back to self and see how you are feeling about it. And so that's what I love about voice dialogue, because you can go back and forth, and not necessarily like the Gestalt chair technique, right? There's so many different techniques of parts
I
work,
know.
but like
And I love them.
yes, yes, and I integrate them, and I'm sure you do too. It's just like I love what you said, is that there's something that she needs, and when your parts are healed, which doesn't necessarily happen in one session, right? But like when your inner child is healed, then she's exuberant and intuitive, and just like because we do have different versions of inner children, like you said, but like if it's the 4-year-old,
Yes.
4-year-olds are happy and playful, and they're so intuitive, and they're tuned in to the energetics, like you said. And so the
Yes.
goal is to have all the parts integrated so we can really hear their wisdom and get the protection and get the wisdom and get the insight and get the joy, that they have. And, to use an IFS term, unburden
Yeah.
I don't want to say trauma because I'm a coach, but the wounds.
Right. The
And I'm
wounds, that's a
laughing,
good
but it's
word.
just because of the semantics. But obviously it's very tender, painful stuff that we have to have a lot of compassion for.
Exactly. And I have a lot of people ask me and my clients, like, what exactly is integration? And so for me, I think for it's just being aware of them. And I love what you said. We unburden them because, and another word could be in a way, parenting. So if this 4-year-old, because many of our very early inner children formed in our early households. That's where it all first happened. And so a lot of those 4-year-olds or younger, unbeknownst to us, are actually running our lives.
Yep.
So that we, so this 4-year-old is the one that's like doing the dating apps and feeling weird about it all. It's important to say, okay, no, it's not a place for my 4-year-old. And so to me, integration is when you start to realize, wait a minute, did I just give my 4-year-old my adult romantic life? No, I want my 4-year-old around so that I can take the wisdom and the playfulness. So that when my partner wants to kind of play and wrestle in a fun way, then I can access my 4-year-old and we can like throw water at each other and something fun and silly. And it doesn't matter how old we are. And just till we laugh, till we cry. Like that's part of, and then laugh again. So to me, that's integration. If somebody is wondering, well, I'm not sure even what that means, or is that an intellectual thing? There's no right way to do it, but integration to me means being aware. And that way for people that are like, well, how will I know if it's integrated? And then what you just get to know more of yourself. And then what Sidra Stone, one of my mentors who co-created it, said, then you start to understand what resonates today. And
Mhm.
that goes back to what you were saying, the deep resonance. And so these selves, including the beautiful ones you described that are still and they're connected to the wounds, or they're just connected to our spiritual oneness, those are the ones that are often so quiet,
Mhm.
and they you don't hear them under the noise of busyness. And that's in a way the simple gift of voice dialogue is you get to say, does this resonate today? And if
Mhm.
it doesn't, and there's grief about that, you can handle the grief. But you can also say, but
Mhm.
it doesn't resonate today. I just, those type of relationships are no longer effective. Or, I have people who are like pre and post sobriety relationships? And how can they have fun? And this is amazing. Maybe I'd love to hear if you have this, but if you don't, share this with your clients. I have a client who dated someone post sobriety. Do you know what they did for their dates? They would go in their area and find the wildest roller coasters. And these were full on adults. And so I just love that idea, because the one of the partners is the one that had to give up alcohol. He kind of missed that craziness, but he
Yes.
found it in roller coasters.
Right. And that's, yeah, I think that's a perfect segment to get back to the, the how to, because, that's the title, is how to resolve the inner conflict about your relationship.
Yeah.
And so the principle you just demonstrated is beautiful. It's, you have the part, and the part wants that exciting rush, right?
Right.
And then you, as the mature adult, can be like, oh, okay, well, that's a positive thing to want. How else can we get that exciting rush? And you can co-create it with your part, because you've separated from the part. And so therefore you can hear, because when you're aware that there's all these conflicting parts inside of you, it can be cacophonous. You're just like, it's too much. So it's like, you have to separate and be with each one and find out, like, what does it want? What does it not want? What is it afraid of? What is it concerned would happen if you did that? And I mean, I know you have of the voice dialogue questions, and I have a list that I use with my clients, but so how would you describe, if somebody's in inner conflict about their relationship, part of them really is attracted to their partner and likes, men or women, the other person, but part of them feels that doubt or that conflict about it. So how do you use voice dialogue to resolve that?
So one of my favorite exercises, which your listeners can do right away, is to do an inner selfie report. And just in a work day versus a non-work day, just notice little bullet points, what selves come out. And even as we're talking, if they hear like, oh, the roller coaster self, or those kind of things, because a lot of people, they don't realize they're in and out with different selves all day long. Because again, we're talking about a normal situation. And so say you're at work and you realize, oh my gosh, I can feel my scared self when I'm with this particular coworker or supervisor, and just note them. So that's first, realizing, wow, I do this all day, every day. But then, as you know, with awareness, then you can start to pull in like, oh, I know that is an intimidating person. I'm going to bring up my alpha just a little, so that, that kind of thing. So you get to build your muscle. So in terms of the relationship, I would suggest writing like as an image of a tug of war, like the parts that are pro the relationship and the parts that are against. And it's not about convincing you of anything at first. It's literally finding out. So you just mentioned like the one that's attracted, maybe the one that's desperate. Like, I don't know, he seems interested, just say yes. Okay, just write them down. Even if you feel your judgment, that's okay. But write them down and as truthfully as possible. And maybe the others that are against it. I think he drinks too much. Or, maybe there is a judge. Well, that's okay. The judge may have some very good points. Or he's
right, as long as we translate them.
Exactly. Or something that we're not so like, we would be accused of being shallow. I think I want someone more handsome or in some form. Write that down, even if you could like hear your girlfriend's voices saying, well, that's superficial. It's like, okay, the superficial selves. And then sometimes a couple of things with the cacophony, which I love. Once this cacophony is out on a list, and it's the tug of war, pro and con, it's out of your head and it automatically starts to be a little less chaotic. You're like, oh, and then you can start to write down, what are the gift and sting of each self? Well, myself that's attracted to him, maybe if I now want a life partner because I want to get out of my dating phase, like dating was fun, but now I want to really focus on someone that I can spend my life with, or at least this part of my life, then that one that's attracted maybe has to go to the back a little bit and you lead with other ones. Always keep that attracted one around. But what voice dialogue helps you with is to be more strategic and not in some manipulative way, but in some way that helps you with your resonance. Like if this new way is resonating with you, then you probably have to lead with different selves, especially if it's kind of different.
Oh, the video is
Is now my
freezing.
husband.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the video froze for a second.
Well, I was just going to say when ultimately many years ago, I decided I wanted my life partner. And I actually was on a dating frenzy and I was loving it. And they were amazing men, but they were not ready for their life partners. And there was one that I would have chosen. And once that person told me no, or it was clear that it was a no, I'm like, all right. And I created a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. But I took a risk, but I broke up with everyone and told all of my friends to invite me to parties because I'm good at parties and I love them. So it would never be a waste of an evening. And that's where ultimately I met the person who became my husband because I had to shift my behaviors.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's so key is that all the parts are welcome. We're not gonna, kill off any of the parts, right? They're all part of
No,
us. And they all have a message, and the ones that are appropriate for a particular situation, we can choose to lead, right? And I think the key to that is parts like children. They need to be heard and validated for their point of view before they're willing to step aside and let someone else lead, right? Like
totally.
kid wants a candy bar for dinner, you just say no, you can't. Kid's gonna throw a temper tantrum, right? But if you sit down and you're like, I know you want the candy bar, that would taste so good, and guess what, you're gonna have it when you're done eating. How does that sound? And like then you're
Beautiful.
parenting beautifully, right? Because you're validating the kid first, and then you're saying, well, here's the benefit of doing what it is that we want, and here's the consequences of not doing it. Let's be a team together. And that's the way that you can parent your parts.
Absolutely. And just to extend what we talked about a little further, and you could even think about a body part like, and if you just eat that candy bar and no dinner, your stomach's going to hurt, not in
Exactly.
a bad way, not punishing, but those parts of you are like, they hold memories of why it's better to eat first before dessert. It's not necessarily arbitrary, although to our 4-year-old selves and 4-year-old kids, it feels absolutely arbitrary.
Right, exactly, because they don't understand the concept of
Right. They're like,
like healthy food. It's just like, this tastes good. And we still have that
exactly.
part of us, and that's the part that can enjoy healthy sensual pleasures, and that's important to cultivate, as well as all the other rational parts. Like it's important to have all of it.
Exactly, exactly. And also not to ask your rational self to be your Aphrodite that puts together a lovely evening. So you
Yeah.
want the you want to access the alter ego with the precise superpower you need.
Yes, yes, and just be authentic. I mean, I think it's a yes and. I love the yes and rule of improv. I teach that in terms of how to create boundaries in an empowered way. Like
Right.
there's just so many positive uses of the yes and. Um, but yeah, so I want to really hone in on what listeners can take away from this. So first they write down the parts, and then are there particular questions they should ask the parts in order to
Yes.
really have the ones that aren't right for the situation to step aside?
Absolutely. And in fact, I for all your viewers, I have a free ebook which will include these questions.
Oh, great.
So, yeah. So some of the questions are what are some of your early memories? Where are you in the body? What do you need? Who are you? What's your preference? And if you have a self when it's related to a particular thing, like do I stay with Bob or do I try with Jeff? You could ask them, what's your preference, Bob or Jeff? And
Mhm.
that doesn't mean you listen to anyone's self. You listen for sure and validate and mirror like you just did beautifully. But then here in center, you figure out what resonates with your whole orchestra.
Exactly.
The percussionists don't get to dictate your whole life. But what is the whole orchestra? So that's also, you can be really concrete. Like, what do you think of Bob, perfectionist, or whatever self you're talking about?
Yeah.
And then, we are intuitive people. So if your intuition says, oh, I want to find out about X, ask. So it's not limited to these questions. And I always say, if there's a question kind of burning, ask, because it's forming because it's needing to be asked and answered.
Yes, exactly. And then you'll get an intuitive sense of, okay, that's my 4-year-old saying that. That's really legitimate and I can integrate that. And is that the advice to act on in this case? Like you can get an intuitive hit about it because you've separated from it. I think there's so much research in the psychotherapy world now about the disassociating or separating from the parts so that you can get their wisdom. Because otherwise, if you're in inner conflict and you don't separate first, which is different than dissociating, right? You're still in your body, but you're
Yes.
separating, meaning you're like feeling the energy of that part. And in voice dialogue, you actually embody the part and then come back, like you said, which I love.
And you
The
don't fully identify is what you're saying. In other words,
Right.
if you don't realize that you're running your life from your perfectionist and your rule maker, you think that's all you are. And I love
Right.
that. You move over and you realize you have this laissez-faire person. And then you come back. It's so liberating, like, wow, I'm not fully identified with just one or the other. And that's the separation. And there's so much
Mhm.
freedom in that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And choice, because then you can choose like,
Yes.
oh, I want to embody this aspect of myself now, which doesn't mean you're not having access to all other parts, right? It is that integrated whole. And I know this interview is just a small taste of it. Voice dialogue has such a rich array of tools for integration. But that's
Absolutely.
like the
Well, you're
process.
making me think of something else, if that's okay. Play. I have a lot
Yes.
of clients who have a lot of pain that they feel like in their childhood they did not play enough. There wasn't enough playfulness. And then as an
Mhm.
adult, they feel like they're kind of trapped in these goal-oriented lives. And so
Right.
just now it's occurring to me, like our 4-year-old. So let's say you're dating and your 4-year-old is like fundamentally bored, and you realize the person you're with isn't playing, what doesn't meet you to play. Now, I've heard, if you'll tell me if I've misunderstood you, but then you could try to access in a playful way your dates or your partner's playful parts. But if fundamentally that person just isn't wanting to play as part of your love relationship, then that 4-year-old may be very right. Like, you know what? You're going to just lock into this mature thing, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. But if play is part of your soul shaking love,
Yes.
well, then you have to break up with that person because that's not who he is. That
Yeah,
is not,
or like you have to talk to him about it and see if that's something
I
he
mean,
wants
after,
to
yeah.
cultivate within himself and he's willing to do it, but that's up to whether or not you're willing to be patient because change takes time.
Yes, and I do mean I'm always for trying, and exactly. And I just mean if that process ends up not working, then you would. But yeah, people often just they're a little they just those are disowned selves. But give
Yes.
them a little time and they might outplay you and you're like, "Whoa, I'm so glad what I unleashed here." And then again, it's soul shaking. And soul shaking love to me is not just the sensual well, it is sensual to play, but not just maybe you have a vision of it that I think there's often so much more. And often it's in silly connections and just laughing, which then of course is fully, it just opens up the body and it's connecting.
Yes, yes, exactly. I completely agree. I mean, I define soul shaking love as that mind, body, and spirit connection, that you have with
Yeah.
yourself and with others. And I totally agree. I mean, sensuality is of course part of it, but it's only one part of it. But it's important, and it's important to identify all parts of ourselves and integrate them. And I mean, I want to say just on my own, like integration is not necessarily like snap your fingers either. I mean, I'm working right now to own the more feisty part of myself because I
Mm.
disowned that when I was a kid. And I even noticed on this interview, I might be being a little bit more interrupting you and, not necessarily being like, wow, that was amazing what you just said, which it is. But I think that like
But
I'm
we're
integrating
playing.
that part. Yeah, we're playing. Exactly. And I want to demonstrate that. It's like, it can be messy. Life is messy. And what's important if you notice that you're allowing a new part to come into awareness, like, oh, I'm like a little feisty today and I'm just doing inner work and let me know if I'm being too feisty with you. And it can lead to more intimacy if you say it like that.
Yeah. Yes. And this goes to permission. a lot of people don't even realize what they have not allowed themselves to do. And it seems to me the love arena is big about that. And again, I'll just speak for myself or my clients. Like, let's say you have a part that's like, it is not safe to be too overtly sexual. That part is going to be correct sometimes. Now, that part can't run the whole show, but you have to listen if, and say, you're coming to, I don't know, a place where suddenly that part says, be careful. But if that part has made it so you have completely said, nope, overtly sexual is just off the permission slip list, you've got to be conscious of that. And you're like, is that still what I want my permission slip to say? Or can I give
Mhm.
myself like, and then often when you do, your partner is given permission to join you. And then your partner's like, wow, I didn't even realize that was like something I had said I couldn't do. And so
Mhm.
so then it's like you open the yes and bigger and bigger, and with boundaries. This is not at all against boundaries. I think boundaries help you be freer, frankly. If you're not good at boundaries, you will never really be free. They go together.
Yeah. I think, was it you who told me that analogy years ago, where if kids are in a playground and there's a fence around it, they'll go all the way up to the edge of the fence, even if it's like a large lawn. But if there's no fence around it, they'll stay in the little edges of the playground because they're
I
not sure
love
where
it.
the edge is. And, so the boundary creates the space to play within it.
No, but it wasn't me, and I don't know that one, but I love it because I think that's exactly right. Because then it's about unknown. Like, ooh, if I go past the merry-go-round, then what will happen? And it's not conscious. Back to that, it's just I think inherently uh, there's something primal about that. Just you know, I love that. The other thing you were talking about was research with separation, and they've done this more and more with the brain imaging, which I find fascinating. Is that when we use the third person, then we're using the cerebral cortex, and they even show that your ability to make decisions and not be so emotionally dysregulated gets improved if you're like, Bridget, you can do this, versus I, which is closer to the amygdala. And with voice
Mhm.
dialogue, I feel it's like the brain science is showing what we always do. Because when you go to the self, I speak as the self. If I'm now Bridget's playful self, I speak about Bridget in the third person, but I get to be I as the playful self. And then when we come back to center, I really embody a larger I, and I can talk about my playful self, all of which helps that separation you're talking about. And now I can sense this playful self, and I can tell, no, playful self, we're in a serious situation. We can't, now is not the time to play, but we will later. It just gives you so much freedom. But you're right, the research is really backing up more and more all of these things that many of the parts work pioneers kind of naturally knew was helpful.
Exactly. Yeah. And I completely agree. And, the on a scientific level, what happens when we get triggered is the blood drains out of our thinking brain and it goes to our amygdala and our arms so that we can fight, and our legs so we can run away. Right. And so all parts work modalities, including voice dialogue, with that separation, what it does is, because it forces you to get back in your thinking brain in order to work with the parts, it gets you out of being triggered, because now all of a sudden
Exactly.
your thinking brain is online and can soothe the trigger and can reparent the wounded parts, and now you can work through it.
And I think that has a secondary gain of confidence. I always say we can have a bravado self, but true confidence is when you realize, oh, I have tools that can work. So if I am
Mhm.
triggered, I'm not just destabilized.
Yeah.
I have something to do. So then you're not asking the world to behave in a way it's not gonna. Like, hey, world, can you just not trigger me and we'll all be good? Like, so you made me think of that. It's like a double, it's so powerful because I think the long lasting thing is like, all right, I can do what you just described and parent myself. And then you have more courage naturally, kind of like because you have this fence called I have skills. So you might have more courage to date more if that's what you're struggling with, or more courage to ask what you actually want,
Mhm.
or more courage to be, as you said, more authentically spontaneous, so
Yep.
that that person will get to know you better because
Yeah.
more of you.
And, if you have an inner conflict, like part of you wants this, part of you wants that in the relationship, then after you hear the wisdom and the message and kind of get a sense of all the parts, then you can have that separation to check in with the whole of you. Okay, now do I really want to listen to that, inner critic or perfectionist self, or do I want to listen to my intuition, or to my the part of me that knows what's good for me, right? Or my inner healthy parent part, or like once you get the wisdom from all the parts, then you can integrate all the wisdom and make that holistic decision.
And the other thing, even though we're all mature adults on some levels, like we all have the kids that we want what we want when we want it. And I think a lot of people are, for different reasons, when they meet a person, they want to jump past all of these painful growth points. Like, are we right for each other? Do we like the same thing? And I always say, and it doesn't matter if my client is 16 or 76, it's like you can only know if they're trustworthy over time.
Mm-hmm.
All kinds of things, but time is only going to tell. So if they say they're responsible, you can believe them,
Right.
but only time is going to tell if that's accurate according to how you define responsible, for example. So I think that
Exactly.
other part, that's like you have to take in the information, and sometimes that's where the denier cells are like, I don't want it to be true, so I'm not looking.
Right.
It's like, you know what?
Yeah.
But it is true. And let's do some grieving, because sometimes there are parts like, well, if we let this one go, what if we never get one again? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel your sadness. And yes, that would be very sad. And it's not what we want, but we're not accepting the unacceptable either. That's not the math that we're doing, because we want love. We're going to accept unacceptable love. No.
Yes, that was beautifully demonstrated, how to really give empathy to your part and validation, and then come from your wise self, and when
Yes.
you're really coming from your wise self, then the part, if it feels really heard, and validated first and empathized with, wants to do what's in the highest good. That's my wisdom, but you might have to work through a lot of the old wounds first.
Exactly, exactly. But again, it's empowering. And empowering does not always mean everything works out just the way you had hoped. But that doesn't mean you don't lose your power. And I think that's really important for people
Oh,
to
I
understand.
love that. That's such a wise statement, like we can absolutely use our power to influence the situation, but we can't control it.
Exactly, exactly. And we can love our controller who wants to, because the controller has our back, but it's just not omnipotent,
Yes,
unfortunately.
yes, yes. Although the spiritual part of us is, but it's just a part of us.
Exactly, exactly.
Oh my God, I love it. I love all the parts. They're just fun and playful, and I love
They
playing.
are, I know. And the inner conflict is there's another piece, if we want to bring it to the outer universe just a little bit. So we have
Yes.
an inner conflict, let's say, and so that the way we just outlined what to do, often it helps us identify the conflict. Oh, maybe it's because I'm afraid to get hurt. That's the conflict. So one, it helps really articulate what is the conflict. And
Mhm.
then once you know, then you have much more a way to like dig in. So, but often when you have that inner conflict, but the person that you're with, even if it's just dating or if it's a coworker you're attracted to, but you're not even dating or somebody like that, they often hold disowned parts of you. So
Mhm.
often that's why like people are attracted to powerful alpha types at first, and then they find them controlling and in
Sensitive.
not unfeeling, insensitive. Thank you. And so that powerful alpha that always attracts you, and then you judge them for being insensitive, that's your disowned self. Where are you disowning your alpha? Or
Right.
even your arrogance. Now, weirdly, I'll make an admission on your show. I've always adored arrogance. I know people hate it, but there's a part of me that has always found it sexy. And I know it's because that there's a part of me that was disowned confidence for me at one time. I was not confident. And what that part saw in arrogance was confidence. And it was a bit of my Aphrodite would be like. Now that's kind of taboo because we're supposed to hate arrogance, but I've helped many clients understand you like what you like and what does it represent. But once I was able to understand that arrogance I was looking out at and being attracted to, once I'm like, all right, well, I can own my, like, I got this confidence self, which isn't the whole thing. I have to admit, I still kind of like an arrogant guy. I don't like an asshole, and I
Yeah.
don't, but I do. I kind of like, wow, who are you that you know everything? Like, I'm intrigued. I know they don't know everything, but I will also own that I like that in a person. Actually, I kind of like it now. It's not just romantic. So you get to like what you like, but you also get to see what you are not embodying in yourself. And you like him because you're
Mhm.
seeing in you what you need, which is a little medicine. You need some arrogance.
Right. And then you can work on cultivating that in yourself. And I mean, I want to say, like, if you own the confident part of yourself, I imagine, and I mean, I want to see if this is true for you, and then you're around that arrogant person, you'll be able to stand up for yourself more. You're not going to just be a
Totally.
doormat.
And maybe I won't be as attracted because it won't blind me to the fact that actually he's a bit of a narcissist. And so that's the other thing. I won't be blinded by the things I actually don't like and maybe why this person isn't a good partner. Or this person maybe wouldn't be a romantic partner, but maybe this person is actually someone I do want to do a business deal with. Like maybe I like that forward motion, and in the right arena, this person could be really powerful. It gives you more options back to that again. But yes, I don't need him for me to cultivate myself. And sometimes I call
Mhm.
it medicine. Like you need a dose of that arrogance and a homeopathic dose of that arrogance. And this exercise is in my book. What would be different in the next 24 to 48 hours? And most of the
Yes.
time, people know exactly what would be different. Oh, I would tell my boss I can't work weekends.
Yes.
There you
Yes.
have it.
No, I totally agree. And yeah, I think it's wonderful what you're saying. And I mean, I do want to say just one, caveat, because a lot of people might think you're saying owning arrogance means becoming arrogant.
No, thank you.
Um,
Thank
and
you.
yeah, and what we mean is using the energy for good. And you can only use the
Yes.
energy for good if you have gotten to know that part of yourself, and you have a relationship with it, and then you can use that energy for the highest good.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. That is 100% how I mean it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know because you're a wonderful voice dialogue teacher. And I know you also wrote a book. So, gosh, I mean, our time is almost up, but I want to, I mean, I know you have this free book for everyone. And I know you also wrote a book called The Final Eighth Stuckness. And I want to hear, like, what is the final eighth, and have you talk a little bit about that so that watchers and listeners can learn about you and your work more too.
Absolutely. The Final Eighth, Enlist Your Inner Selves to Accomplish Your Goals, is a book I wrote based on voice dialogue so people can use it through the book and figure out how to do it, but also a few other tools. Because in my practice, I began to see what I suddenly was calling the final eighth because I'd worked with all of these clients. I saw them get 7/8 of the way there. And once this happened to a lawyer client of mine, and because I used to think, well, actors and performers, I work with a lot of people in entertainment, maybe it's something to do with the creative insecurities. No, I would see people work so hard toward their goal and be this close to the finish line, and suddenly they stalled and were miserable, and I didn't know what was going on because I knew that they were really working. And then once this happened to a lawyer who was trying to navigate her where she was going to move up in the firm, I realized, well, this is a thing, this is universal, and it doesn't matter what the field is or even what the issue is. It could be professional, financial, love, relationship. So that's when I realized, you've got parts of yourself who are for the goal and
Mhm.
parts of yourself that are against the goal, which is that
Mhm.
tug of war. And what happens is those parts that are against your goal usually are still loyal in a distorted fashion to some core negative beliefs, how something isn't going to work out. You're not lovable. Success happens to other people, but not you. So you have to explore those parts of yourself to unknot this tug of war, this double bind. And that's why I wrote the book, because I just thought this is a success issue, is the other thing. And it's about
Mhm.
hardworking people. You know, there's not a lot of books, or none that I found, where it's about, but wait, I did all the right things and it's still not working. What's going on? Then
Right.
it's inner conflict. It's emotional. It's not logical because you've done all the logical things.
Yep.
You've taken the courses, you've gotten the training, but you say you want X and you think you want that with every fiber of your being. You learn that not every fiber is for this goal, but that
Right.
is empowering, and it's the way in. I have a whole chapter on give up the goal. I
Mhm.
realized as I was writing the book, I was like, oh, I don't want all the alpha, what is it, the type A personalities? No. So I have a whole chapter devoted to, are you doing it for other people's approval? Does it
Mhm.
resonate with you
Mhm.
anymore?
Mhm.
And give it up. And you have full permission. You could take naps for the next year, every Saturday afternoon. Like, wouldn't that be
Yes,
lovely?
yes.
Yeah,
I mean, I love my work and all. Naps are good once in a while. But
exactly.
but no, I think that's so important. And I really do resonate with everything that you're saying, of course. And I mean, I think that the same process that can be used for inner conflict with any goal can be used for inner conflict about a relationship. So if you have inner conflict about your relationship, I encourage you to check out Bridget's book, The Final Eighth, and I'll put the link below the video and the show notes of the podcast. And yeah, and I know you have your free gift. And before we go into all of that, let's just really summarize the exercises that people can take away on their own right now. And so, we talked about making the list of parts. And do you want to summarize it for us? So it's
Yeah. So
in
making,
inner
sorry.
conflict about the relationship.
About the, yes, so I call that the inner selfie report. So you make your inner selfie report. So you do that just for your day in your life, so you get to know yourself just as is. Then with the relationships, you write the parts that enjoy the relationship or want it, or somehow pro, and then you write down the parts that are against it. Now the against could even just be, like you said, doubting selves. Then you can journal from different selves' point of view. So as the doubting self, this is my opinion. And you don't try to make it not doubt. That's your doubting self. It will always doubt. And then you can look at what the doubting self says. And then you might realize, you can upgrade. Is this accurate today? Is this contemporarily true? And if it is, then you can make changes. And if it isn't, you're like, oh, I can just update. Yeah, that was true in elementary school. It's not true today. And but that self kind of got stuck in the past. So
Mhm.
it's the itemizing the self. And then in the free book that everyone is welcome to, I actually have a diagram with the tug of war selves, so that you can use the diagram to list it, because sometimes, especially visual people, it's
Mhm.
very helpful. And as we talked about, kind of gets this mess out of your head so you can
Yeah.
look at it to see what's going on.
Yes, that's wonderful. And then once you get to know the selves, then you can really tune in and say, what is in the highest good for me? And which selves do I want to, just empathize with and, tell them I'll reparent them and meet their needs in other ways. And which selves do I really want to enlist in this case and really embody so that I'm, being my best self for this situation.
Yeah. And then if you find that you're attached to beliefs you didn't really realize were still operating, like things don't work out, you can say, then you can even say, well, which selves believe that? And let me update. And you grieve where things didn't work out. This is not about lying to yourself, or I don't know, what is
Yeah.
that? Toxic positivity. None of that. None of that. It's just
Yes.
like some selves of ours hold our stories. And we have been hurt as humans, and we don't ask those parts of us that hold our truths to not hold them. And they're not negative. You just can't let that be the whole story. Some of those tender parts that went through pain, you're like, that's right. And then you can remember. So if the antenna comes up like, am I with the same guy with a different name? That part's actually an ally. Says,
Hmm.
this is feeling horribly familiar in a way I don't like. And instead of
Yeah.
pushing that self away, you're like, I know, I'm bummed too, but let's investigate this, because if I really want to change my pattern, I got to listen to
Yes,
myself.
exactly, exactly. And then, I love that you have a free gift that guides people through this initial process. And so I'd love to hear more about that. And of course, we'll put the link to your free ebook below this
Yes.
video on the show notes, as well as the longer one. So yeah, tell us about the free ebook.
So I think it's about 10 pages. And of course, I'm around. So if anyone has questions, just contact me, email or social media. But basically, it's a way to introduce how the selves work. And again, there's a lot of exercises with diagrams. So you understand that they have different priorities. And it also has some explanations. And it includes a whole page of questions. So you don't have to remember the questions. You can say, well, let's just look at this book, like, what are your early memories, things like that. So
Yeah.
it really tries to help people just really go through it in a facile way. So it's just easy. All right, let me do this exercise. Let me try this.
Yes, I love that. Right. And I mean, I want to really, make sure people get the potential of this, right? Because like if there's an outer conflict, in your relationship, it's important to do the inner work first before you resolve it, right? Do you have an example you want to share about that?
Well, I what comes up is the classic the putting the toilet lid up or down. It's a cliche, but I
It is,
actually
but it's a cliche for a reason.
exactly. So I actually worked with someone like that. So let's say, so my client was very angry at the her partner because it was classic. She wanted it down, and he was putting it up. And so then we did a facilitation. What I love about voice dialogue, even after all these years, you can have an idea of what's coming. There's always surprises. So this very kind of I don't know, wispy self came out. What bothered her about the toilet lid being up was the smell. She was
Mhm.
such a sensual, aromatic part. And the inner conflict it reflected, it was easier for my client to be angry and make him wrong, the judge, than to risk being vulnerable and asking what she needed. And
Yeah.
she needed a lot more softness. And we realized she had a nose like she could have maybe even been a classic perfumery person. I mean, I met this self, I had no idea. My whole opinion about everything about toilet tops, up or down, changed. But that inner conflict was her not being well, too scared, really. She was
Yeah, to
terrified
be
to ask
vulnerable. And
to be
it's that
vulnerable.
vulnerable part who's so sensitive and sensual that's going to inspire her partner to want to serve that. Yep.
Yeah. And
That's
then
a good
ultimately go, oh,
example.
it stinks in here.
Right, right. Because of course, we could do a whole nother interview on that, of course. But if you make someone wrong, then
Exactly.
unless they're in a really patient mood, you're going to get into an argument, and
Totally.
or they'll dismiss it. But if you do with the right person, get vulnerable in an inspiring way where you're talking about what you want, which came from that wistful part that she wasn't even in touch with before, then that can be
Oh,
endearing.
I know. And then she got to know herself beautifully. And she did. She led. She was very what you might call classic New Yorker. There was a toughness and a forward energy. This self, separate from her partner, was absolutely going to upgrade her lifestyle, slow
Mhm.
her down, and like you said, just be. And yeah, things really shifted.
Right.
In
And we're
the
not saying that like she needs to be that instead, but then she has choice and freedom. She can be that really dynamic go-getter self when it's appropriate. And then she could be more of that being self when it's appropriate. And that gives you more choice and freedom.
and she understood that her partner wasn't doing it to be because he was an insensitive bore who was just gross to her. He didn't have a nose like her. Like it
Mhm.
didn't occur to him because he's done and he left. It's
Right.
not like he didn't do it against her. And they had so much more room because she was trying to lock him into something. He got defensive as he should because she was accusing him. And all of it was about this thing over here that neither party knew. So
Yeah.
I'm just agreeing. And then he would go, oh, right. I don't have the nose that she has, but I care about her and she cares about this and she's grossed out. I'm not, but I don't want my honey to be grossed out. And then it kind
Yes.
of melted the problem.
Exactly. That's such a good example and so simple. Obviously
Yeah.
there's more complicated ones, but that's why you have your short book and your long book, and of course your practice. And I know you also have a complimentary third Thursday at 8 o'clock Eastern every month, where readers can learn more, and you actually do a voice dialogue live, right? So do you want to tell the readers and
Yeah.
listeners about that too?
Love this. Yeah. So every third Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, it's free on Zoom. We do a live voice dialogue session so people can see it in action because we've been talking about it, but as you know, there's nothing like seeing it. And then we do a group exercise with whoever's there, so that everyone that is there gets a taste of how it is for themselves. But we do a live, we have someone who comes in, discusses a problem. We go to oneself in reference to it and then another, and we explain it as we do it. But I've had people that were participants that were so blown away. They had new insights on their own problems and they were just viewers, but they watched how it happened. And so that's every single month, whatever the third Thursday is at 8 p.m. Eastern. And it's so much fun. So just contact me and we'll give you the Zoom link. And it's terrific. It's live, so we don't record it. It's not like you can ask for it later. But come the next Thursday, we welcome people to come more than once, because once you realize it, it's like the peeling of that onion. You're like,
Yes.
wow. So,
That's beautiful. There's so many offerings that you're giving, Bridget. I'm just so honored to present them. And,
oh,
so I encourage everyone to download that free ebook. And I'll put the link to that below so that you can try voice dialogue for yourself if you're in any kind of inner conflict, and to see how well you can resolve it that way. And then, of course, to read Bridget's longer book, which I'll put the link to below the video, to The Final Eight Stuckness and How to Get Over That, right?
and
And
we're just going to do the audio book in about a couple months. It's going to come out because a lot of people just don't like the reading these days. So we're going to have the whole book on audio books pretty soon too.
that's
I
wonderful.
know, I'm
Yeah,
excited
I'm one
about
of those
that.
people. I listen to a lot of audiobooks.
I
Um,
think the vast majority now do. Like statistically, I believe it's much larger. I think commuting, things like that.
right.
Anyway, yeah, you'll be able to listen if that's more the way you like to take books in.
Wonderful. Yes. And then I'll put Bridget's contact information here too, so that you can email her if you want to access the third Thursday meeting, because it's such a generous offering that you do for your community. And you do such great work. And, I really am appreciative of you, Bridget, because voice dialogue was the first parts work modality that I studied. And since then I've studied many more and I integrate them, but voice dialogue is near and dear to my heart because it's just such a way for you to get access to those
Yeah.
parts by fully embodying them. And it is so creative, and, it accesses our inherent creativity and our inherent playfulness and our inherent, compassion. When you're
Yeah.
really embodying the part fully, then you can really be empathic and compassionate towards that part that you might not be able to if you don't separate, or if you're just, feeling it in your body. There's so many different parts work modalities, and this one really is so dynamic and, so embodied. And so I encourage everybody to check out voice dialogue.
You nailed it. That's a most beautiful description.
Yes, yes. And it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. And
Oh, it's so good to see you. I remember our work very well. You were, I knew you were gifted with it from the beginning.
thank you. Yes, yes. Bridget and I worked together. I think it was in 2013 that I did your training. It was so long ago. But yeah, you're an amazing facilitator of voice dialogue. So I encourage everybody to reach out to Bridget. You have a practice in New York City, and this Zoom meeting on Thursdays is a way to get to know her. And, Bridget is just a wealth of information and a beautiful soul. And it was just a
Oh,
pleasure to have you here today.
thank you for having me. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and may everyone have that freedom and that sense of wholeness and integration and wisdom that comes from really doing the inner work.